in terms of the industries that are attracting a lot of investors and funding, I would say there are four main ones, right? So we start with fintech, where about $3 billion of the investment was expected this year alone. The second one would be health tech, where across all of Southeast Asia, the total investment is about 650 million, and Singapore actually takes about 70% of that. And then the next two, which are more up and coming, is obviously the food tech space and the blockchain space, right? By blockchain, it encompasses everything with decentralized finance, NFTs, and the likes. And really, what is driving this, right? Like for sectors like fintech, for example, there's heavy involvement by the government, the central banks, to very actively develop the sector in multiple fronts, right? It's either by creating policies that are friendly to attract companies and capital, to even doing very large-scale events, and to engage different sectors within the ecosystem to talk and connect, right? Especially for fintech, there are already proven business models, a lot of companies overseas that have scaled and grown. So there are benchmarks when it comes to an investment, right? So investors know that if they invest in a startup based here, they can benchmark it to similar metrics in overseas. And that's especially true for fintech. For food tech, there's a very similar thing, right, where the government has heavy backing towards that sector. So there's an initiative that was launched a few years ago. It's called the 30 by 30 goal, which is to produce 30% of Singapore's nutritional needs locally by 2030. Now, this massive goal actually then drives investment, drives innovation, and drives interest in the sector, right? As the country positions itself to be a food hub. Then your other sectors like health tech and blockchain, a lot of it has been COVID-driven, naturally. For example, telemedicine, has been like one of the essential services that needed to be provided due to lockdown. And blockchain's also resurgence also comes heavily through renewed interest, especially right in decentralized technologies, crypto investments, and the Singapore government is very heavily supporting these activities. In terms of picking startups at that earlier stage is really very challenging. But I would say that there are a few clear-cut sectors that if investors are looking out for, they should start zooming in. The first one is very clearly fintech. And even within fintech, I would say areas like the buy now, pay later sector, the decentralized finance sector, these are definitely companies that are raising seed rounds today, definitely have a very clear opportunity to be a unicorn, right, within the next maybe 5 to 10 year period. So the fintech area is, I think, going to mint many more unicorns in the next 5 to 10 years from Singapore and generally even from Southeast Asia. The other sector that I think is very up and coming, but is going to still require a bit of work, is the alternative protein sector. Singapore, again, being positioning themselves as a food tech hub, I believe that there's going to be resources, energy, funding, and all sorts of connections that are going to be thrown to help these companies scale. And because food in Southeast Asia is actually a big problem, from everything from food wastage to access to quality food, I think regionally there's going to be a large market for alternative proteins companies, which would then ideally or hopefully mint the next unicorn. The last one I would say would be gaming-centric blockchain companies that rely on NFTs. I do strongly believe that there will be multiple unicorns in this space because gaming is already such a hot space. We've seen multiple companies get funded by Andreessen Horowitz in this region from markets like the Philippines, and how they are actually helping to provide people a regular income stream through gaming on these platforms. And then pairing that with NFTs and pairing that with the fact that a lot of these platforms are still extremely early, right? I do actually think that multiple billion-dollar companies are going to come from that particular sector. So fintech, alternative proteins, and blockchain gaming companies. I think Singapore has come a long way, right, in being a really startup hub. Probably among the top 10 in the world, but definitely among the top in Southeast Asia. And they've done everything that makes sense for the local country and the local ecosystem. And some of it are definitely ideas that are borrowed from Silicon Valley, but quite a bit of it has been localized to suit the local needs and challenges. And I think moving forward, right, as Singapore grows to find its own unique USP with respect to being a startup hub, it will kind of like focus on interesting areas on its own. And I think the three things, right, that I would love to see Singapore cultivate more, which in some level is quite similar to Silicon Valley, would be firstly, right, to always be ensuring, right, that it's a melting pot of interesting people from diverse backgrounds from all over the world. I think we cannot emphasize this enough. Where you look, even if you look at Silicon Valley, right, it's full of immigrants, it's full of people from all over the world. There's an openness to embracing people with diversity, with different ideas and different backgrounds. And I think Singapore needs to do that and continue to do that on a very, very significant level, and never bend to the pressures, right, of populist ideas, or over focusing on just supporting the local people without making it open for people externally to come, right? So that part of ensuring that we as a country are a melting pot of people from all over the world, all diversities, all ideas, is the critical one. The second thing is really to ensure that Singapore as a hub continues to take risky investments. It is there's good. I mean, startup is very well known, right? Where 9 out of 10 companies fail, maybe 9.9 out of 10 companies fail, right, statistically speaking, right? But this is where I think the VC or the internet industry in general, right, has to be bold in building crazy ideas, has to be bold in investing in crazy ideas, and even for people wanting to join companies, right, there has to be a certain level of boldness that they need to have, or fear that they need to overcome to wanting to join companies that are really trying to do crazy things. So the tolerance for risk needs to be constantly maintained. And I think the last thing is that realization, right, that startups is not something that is something that you do for 10 years and you invest in the ecosystem and after that you leave it alone, right? It's an ecosystem that is constantly evolving and growing. It is an ecosystem that constantly needs to change. So around that change, right, the policies need to be changing, the ecosystem players need to be evolving and changing. The need to solve certain problems also need to be constantly evolving. In the early days of the ecosystem, I remember the government spent a lot of time on the investment side. But now that there's a healthy VC ecosystem, the government has actually shifted a lot of its efforts to other more pressing issues. And I think that constant, change, evolution, unlearning, relearning, as an entire country, we need to constantly do. Indonesia is the most popular other ecosystem outside of Singapore, and there are multiple reasons for this. Right. Firstly, it's very, very clear that the large potential user base, the now quality of companies that are coming out, as well as the quality of the local investors there. The track record has shown that in the last 5 years, Indonesia is definitely an ecosystem to really focus on. There are very significant VCs on the ground in Indonesia, and a large number of them actually only exclusively invest in Indonesia because the opportunity is just so great. Right. I mean, I can rattle off some names, but just for example, there's Alpha JWC, there's ACBC, there's MDI Ventures, there's East Ventures. And these are just probably some of the more well-known ones, Kajora Ventures. But there are really quite a lot of there are VCs. Then there are also the state-owned corporate venture firms, like your BRI and basically the banks, the telcos, and the large family conglomerates. GDP Ventures, for example. So yeah, it has a very healthy investor ecosystem. And I believe once companies like Gojek, which is now Goto, right, with the Tokopedia merger, Traveloka and all that, right, they are going to mint like the next future generation of millionaires that are all going to end up becoming angel investors or potentially even founders again. And then the cycle will just continue, right? The second thing is also that if you look at Indonesia as a from an opportunity standpoint, right, there are still like so many sectors that can be disrupted. There are still so many companies that can be built, right, to scale into multi-billion-dollar companies. So from that standpoint, right, to an entrepreneur that wants to launch something, right, the opportunity to build something big is really massive in Indonesia. And the last thing is really, I think the entire, as a country now, I think they've all started to really rally around this concept of startups. And if you look at Gojek, right, there's a very strong sense of national identity towards Gojek and even the founder, Nadim. And I think a lot of people now look at startup founders as like heroes, you know. So they want to be part of startup organizations. They want to build startup companies. And I think that kind of culture is really, really healthy.